Okay. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Associate Professor Cathy Bettman. I'm currently at the Cairnmillar Institute, but I'm here in my role as a member of the National Heads of Counselling and Psychotherapy Educators Research Committee. And I know that my position on PACFA as chair of the research committee, I know PACFA very much supports our action to be encouraging research and publication. And so I'm absolutely delighted to have you here today to talk about your research, both the process and, of course, to disseminate some of your really interesting and very important results. But I think you will introduce yourself much better than I ever could. So hello, George, and will you introduce yourself to the viewers?
Hello, Cathy. Thank you. Yes, my name is George Prince, and I work as a lecturer in counselling at Murdoch University in Western Australia. I also still work clinically in the drug and alcohol sector, doing group work. And I've recently completed my thesis for the degree of Master of Philosophy, and that was through Notre Dame University in Fremantle. And you, Cathy, and Dr. Madeline Geldenhouse were my supervisors to get to that milestone of finally finishing.
So that was the University of Notre Dame in Fremantle.
Yeah. That's where I was. That's where I was enrolled as a student for the degree. Yes.
Degree. Yes. Okay. So congratulations on that. Nobody obviously could be as delighted as you, but Madeleine and I come very close second to that. So let's begin. Can you talk me through how you came to undertake your research studies? Like, what motivated you to do it?
Well, I suppose what I should have said then was my thesis title was the experiences of parents diagnosed with cancer whilst parenting minor aged children. And I suppose the real initial catalyst for that was just a lived experience of that some years ago with my first wife, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and our sons were teenagers, and we went through a number of challenges in the family through the impacts of that diagnosis, both with behavioural issues with a younger son, and also the stresses that brought on the family, in particular my wife, who was going through treatment, and also in terms of relationships and my relationship with her and communication aspects of that. So it always stuck with me as I went through my undergrad degree in counselling at Notre Dame in Fremantle. I was really struck by areas around developmental psychology, and one what that was like for my sons going through that process, as well as the process of adolescence into adulthood. And it just sort of sat with me about how we dealt with that. And I did a little bit of, I suppose, work on that during my undergrad, but the topic stayed with me after I finished my undergrad, and but I could never convince myself that it was worth the effort of doing anything postgrad-wise. I just didn't have the energy, I don't think. I was working full-time clinically, and I just thought, as much as I thought there was something there, I had to deal with the ego issues of, do I need to have a postgrad or do I not, or what's behind that? And it wasn't really until probably about 4 years later, when I had the chance to do a guest lecture down at Notre Dame, I think it was just in a professional issues sort of unit, where they had people come in from different areas of the industry to do a lecture, and I had the chance to do one from my experience in the alcohol and other drug area. And I just did this lecture and just loved it. I loved doing it. I loved the interaction with the students, and I walked out thinking, well, now I have a reason, because I needed to at least have master's level, if not doctorate level, to be able to do that. And that was the real, I suppose, the final motivation I needed to take a step. And I had already had the topic that I was interested in. that I just had stayed in my head and sort of sitting back there in the recesses of my mind, and I just brought it to the front again. Yeah, and that was the real catalyst.
Yeah, wow. But then how did you take it further? Because, you know, those initial stages of the research proposal, the ethics application, those are not the best part of doing research, but obviously have to be done. So how did you manage to get through that?
I actually quite enjoyed that aspect. Obviously, there was a small amount of coursework as part of the degree. So, and that was really, it was coursework, but at the same time, you effectively were creating your own proposal. But it was a way of breaking it down, and how do you get an idea that's floating in your head into something that's coherent and workable and feasible, that's going to be going to get your candidacy, really. Forgetting about ethics approval, that was the next step. But for me, it was just to get the tick to say, yeah, this is a feasible project, and has merit and significance. So I quite enjoyed that process of getting to that point, and I learned a lot through that. So it was important grounding for me. I didn't really know anything else about research. I didn't really know about methodology and methods and data collection and that sort of thing. I didn't really understand it. I'd certainly read plenty of journal articles during my time in my undergrad, as research for assignments. But doing some of that work really allowed me to engage with the literature in a much deeper way. And I found it very interesting suddenly to read methodology and methods as opposed to introductions and discussions, which tends to be more, I suppose, the process for a lot of people would be, oh, what do I want to read about, what they think about the route.
Yeah.
But then I was suddenly interested in how do they actually do it? What did they do? How do I view this piece of work as a trustworthy piece of work, I suppose. So it really changed my thinking, and it even allowed me to get into reading quantitative articles because suddenly I had a bit of an idea of what was going on. But it was still, it was challenging to get it to a proposal stage. To go through.
But can I just check with you? Was that as part of the Masters of Philosophy? So you enrolled in that, and then basically you were supported as a result of the coursework you had to do into finalizing and getting your head around the actual project itself. And you found that very helpful by the sound of it.
Yeah, I did. And effectively your own topic was your I suppose assignment topic, you like. So there was a unit very much around research and literature review. So the literature review was the initial review I did in relation to my topic. It changed over time, of course, but I had the basics of the literature review, and then the draft research proposal was another assignment, and so that was a chance to work on that and then refine it. So it was good grounding for me because I didn't really know. I hadn't come from a research background. I hadn't really thought about how to go about these things. So it was an important aspect of the degree, just to be able to get to that point of, okay, now I've actually got something that I can work with. Yeah.
Right. So how did you determine the methodology? Like, I know, even in your topic, it was a phenomenological study, but how did you get to that point? How did it marry with what you were trying to do?
Yeah, I suppose I was always going to be a qualitative study coming from a counselling background. I was really interested in what the experience was of parents but I suppose in a way I had to really narrow down my focus. I had the idea, but I wasn't really sure how to make it work into something that was not too broad. and it was really through my literature review that allowed me to sort of start to challenge some of the, there was some quite sort of a lot of literature around this topic, most of it overseas, but a lot of it focused on the impact on children. But then I started to read more recent studies that were suggesting that there were changes, and that sort of perhaps parents were becoming more sophisticated in the way they dealt with their children and communication in families. So it sort of challenged my own thinking, because I was sort of expecting it. Yes, it's going to be the same as it was for my wife and I and our family, and things started to challenge me, and I thought, well, I need to narrow this right down and actually just find out what is it like today. I suppose that's where I came to. As far as the methodology goes, when I really wanted to treat it as if, whatever my experience was and whatever the literature says, doesn't necessarily mean that's what people in the particular context that I was going to be recruiting from, what are they experiencing? And I needed to come at it from a very much that sort of subjective, involving myself in their world and the meaning they make. So really I suppose that's where that phenomenological sort of aspect comes in, just to be able to just really get involved with the experience of those particular people at that particular time.
So yeah, you wanted to gather the voices of the people
very much so.
In the here and now. You wanted to reflect that. But I think what comes into my head was how challenging that possibly could have been for you, having gone through it. You've talked about maintaining objectivity, but at the same time, the subjectivity also being useful, your rapport with these people. And I even remember your sense of responsibility to some of the people you spoke to. It was as though you felt you had a contract and something that you owed to them, especially those that had passed away.
Yeah, yes. Well, it was a privilege and a burden at the same time, because particularly at times when I thought I'm never going to get this thing finished, it was the one thing that weighed on me, that these people, and I had 8 participants in the end, who all gave of their time, when time was pretty precious for some of them, to engage with me in an interview out of some want to contribute something. It was some meaning to them to take part in the interviews. So it was a privilege to have that. It was also a burden then to have to carry, knowing that for their voices to be heard in any way, shape, or form at the end of all of this was really just up to me. So it is a challenge to carry that, but it's also it probably kept me going at the end. And now I feel quite motivated to take it another level of publishing the results too. So that's something I want to do as well.
You mentioned there it kept you going. So that sort of brings to mind that there were other challenges, as there are for all researchers. Can you talk a little bit about what the challenges were for you in the process?
Well, I had 2 particular challenges, and one which researchers all over the world would have struck at the same time, which was COVID-19. And I received my candidacy at the end of 2019, and I was sort of in the process of working through ethics approvals. I had to gain ethics approval, not just through the university HREC, but also because I was recruiting people from a particular cancer centre in a hospital system here. I also had to get HREC approval from the governing health body involved with that hospital, and operational approval. So that was quite lengthy, but just as I was sort of working through that and planning around research participant recruitment, COVID hit, and the protocols for hospitals, of course, were very, very strict. And So that, and that sort of carried on for some time. And then only a handful of months after that, my now second wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. So these two concurrent things occurred. Having achieved my candidacy, suddenly being able to recruit participants, but also to devote the time and energy needed became very challenging. And I suppose this is the thing all researchers have to bear with, that life happens and life gets in the way. So the result of all that was I took some leave of absence for a semester during the hardest part of my wife's treatment, but allowed myself to still tinker with the paperwork involved in working through the ethics applications, and that ended up quite a lengthy process. So I was, by the beginning of 2021, I was sort of, okay, I'm ready to go. I've got all that ready. I'm back on the things. My wife was sort of through the worst of the treatment, and then there was another COVID scare, and that put me back again with the recruitment. So that whole process took probably, between when I was thought I'd be starting recruiting to and getting my interviews done, it probably took something like about, well over a year and a half of interruption and and personal matters as well. So that really was half my time that I was supposed to take in doing the degree, and I hadn't even transcribed an interview by that point. So in time, I was able to get retroactive withdrawal because of the COVID situation. So it all worked out fine in the end. But that was certainly challenging. Yeah. And it was a point in that where I thought, I'm just not going to get the interviews I really need. But we got there.
You got there. Wow, you did. And there were other challenges for you as well, if I recall, because the university supported you fantastically, but in that time, things were happening in other people's lives. So, as happens for some researchers too, their supervisors needed to move on. And so you did have those kinds of challenges as well, but you got through it. So what has been satisfying for you? I mean, if you could encourage people who are going, oh, should I or shouldn't I? What would you say to them?
I remember when I was in the midst of it all, I'd say that if I'd known what was going to be happening, what was going to happen before I started, I wouldn't have started, because it just seemed like the world was just plotting against me and getting this finished. But I often say to students, we don't call it a degree for nothing. It's supposed to be hard. That's what makes it more meaningful. So I suppose for me now, when I read the finished product and read when I view what it is at the end, as painful and as hard as it was getting through it all, I'm incredibly proud of it. I think I have been able to portray, communicate the voices of the participants. I think I've been able to, I suppose, locate a couple of areas in that research that I think is quite significant. But I think also for me personally, the experience of it was sort of transformed a little bit of how I view the experience in my own family. So, and I write about that in the conclusion, that my reflexive practice and journey through has evolved as the thesis came together, and I was able to reach a new position with my sons, and really evolve my view of oncology specialists and the difficulties they face, and also the challenges, what it's like for parents, and how it's understandable how they go about things in families the way they do when difficult things arise. So, yeah, I think that's also worthwhile for me too, that and satisfying that I was, when I think about, that importance of critical thinking, that I was able to come into something way back when I was first even thinking about this topic, and I had a bit of a position which was, it shouldn't be like this, it should be like that, to evolve to a position that's very different to that, is, I'm quite proud of that part too, because it sort of suggests to me that I am open to new ideas, and I am open to being challenged in my beliefs or my biases and my assumptions. So, and I suppose the other part, Cathy, is that by completing this thing, I'm now able to teach. I'm able to teach at a master's level at university. We were talking off camera before that I'm lecturing this morning in a research unit around critical thinking and reflexive practice, and who would have thought I'd be doing that a few years ago? So it's given me it has given me quite a lease on life at an age when maybe I was well on the way to retirement.
We won't talk about age, will we? Because what I also heard you talking about, so yes, now you've mentioned how it's kind of really steered you into an academic career, and you're getting a lot of pleasure. So it's not only the actual study you did, but now you carry that mantle of teaching other people about it and all the studies that they will bring to bear, which is fantastic. But you also talked about, who knows, maybe you have ideas of how you will take what you did a little bit further. So ideas of disseminating your results, which I'd also like to talk about. But can you talk a little bit more about what you're thinking in terms of going further with it?
Well, certainly, my aim is to publish at in a professional journal level, and I suppose my first port of call will be PACTRA, which PACTRA's professional peer review journal. So, as a clinical member of PACTRA, I feel very I suppose there's a connection there that justifies that, and I can't imagine they're going to be disappointed to get at least a submission. And I'll be open to presenting it at conferences. And I think what's interesting about this particular research topic, whilst I've come at it from the point of view of counselling, and I had some ideas involved in it around systemic aspects and families and family systems, there's aspects of it that are relevant to oncology professionals, whether it be oncologists or nurses working in treatment areas, and that around just that awareness. I think there's certainly grounds for further research. I've made some suggestions in the thesis of how that might look, or what things could be trialled, perhaps. Not necessarily for me to be doing that. I'd be happy to help someone else if they wanted to pick up the reins. I'd be risking divorce if I said I was going to be taking this to the next level, but I've always felt that there was certainly a PhD level in this area, but it would have, if I was going to even think about that, I probably would have expanded the participants. So I might have looked at, not just speaking with parents with cancer, but perhaps partners, oncology professional, you can just broaden that whole picture to have a little bit more of a macro view of the whole phenomenon, with a view to some sort of modelling or something that could be tested, I suppose. That was how I could see it expanding into something that would take some work to do. But through my role now with Murdoch, research involved, ongoing research sort of work is part of my role, and there could be opportunities perhaps to sort of into collaborative research for that. I say to students, whenever you're reading an article, particularly qualitative, there's always suggestions for further research at the end of the article. There's the ideas. If you're looking for ideas of something to pick up, if you're researching a particular topic, there's going to be suggestions where it could be taken further, and mine's no different. So from that point of view, I'm quite open to anything. I've just got to be a bit careful. Having gone through what I've just gone through, I've got a great leveler out in the kitchen at the moment, and
well, it might be too soon, but with a little bit of time, maybe the PhD, you've got the real solid foundation to go into that.
Yes. Don't say that too loudly, Cathy.
Okay, I
would love to help someone else get to that though. It would be, but it's as long as you're prepared to take on the challenge. There were some things that I didn't realise how hard it would be. It was quite challenging getting ethics approval through the hospital system, and I was sort of led to believe it will be pretty much rubber stamped. That wasn't the case at all, and I sort of had to work pretty hard through that. But we got there. I got there.
You got there, and that feeling, I can remember when you got the final tick, you've done it. It was a phenomenal feeling. So in the time we have left, can you tell us a little bit about your results? You've spoken about interviewing your participants, so you did semi-structured interviews, and you ended up doing a thematic analysis. Can you tell us what came out of your research?
Yeah, so I interviewed 8 participants who were all in active cancer treatment. They'd been diagnosed between 4 and 12 months previous with cancer and had at least one child under the age of 18. There was one participant who'd been diagnosed longer than that criteria. However, at the time, it was such a struggle to get participants, and he was keen to contribute that my supervisor at the time agreed that to admit him into the study. And really, a lot of what they shared certainly was supported by the literature. Parents' motivation when they're dealing with a cancer diagnosis and have a family with young children was very much focused on protecting children. But the paradox of that is that sometimes that protection means we don't tell them anything about what's going on, and that has the paradoxical effect of not protecting the children, actually leading to perhaps children being aware that something's going on but not knowing, and secrets being kept, and parents dealing with that challenge of wondering whether they're doing the right thing. Other parents felt it was important to be open and communicate with their children, but at the same time, there was a paucity of emotional expression that was very much around maintaining emotional control and just dealing with the facts of the treatment and what's going to happen. Everything's going to be okay. And it seemed that was probably one of the key findings for me, was the difficulties where parents who would say they were quite open with their children would then say, but we've got no idea how they're feeling. And whereas there was a couple of participants who were open in their emotional side of things with their families, and it actually led to closer bonds, even where previously there'd been some conflict with in-laws and that sort of thing. Suddenly there was much closer relationships created. So I suppose that was the important thing to me. What do we mean about, what about emotional communication as opposed to just facts and treatment details? So there's more to open communication than just talking about the facts of the matter, and being able to express ourselves emotionally was important. The other aspect for me to come out of it really was the literature around the role of oncology professionals raising more awareness or helping parents through some of the family issues they might come across. A lot of that literature has come out of, say, the nursing literature and that sort of thing, and it's been quite critical of oncology professionals. Look, when I came through this idea through a systemic lens, families are going to deal with things differently. Different families are going to deal with emotional tidal waves, as Bowen called it, such as a cancer diagnosis in a parent while children are still young, in different ways, and they'll be informed perhaps by the way their families have always dealt with emotional issues or crises. And so the idea that an oncology professional can have a one-size-fits-all answer to all that, to me, just seemed a little bit too simplifying what could be quite a complex issue. So I suppose that's where my position evolved a lot as I looked into it that way. So for me, I would really be looking at how can we support oncology professionals in that, or what can be done. I talked about in the thesis, my own wife's experience of breast care nurses, and how important that was to help with the aftermath of surgeries and just that early stage of treatment as a breast cancer sufferer. And I thought, what would it be like to have, say, some sort of liaison person like that devoted to parents of children who are dealing with cancer, and how they can perhaps find out what help do they need in their circumstances. Do they need any help? Is there anything that could be helped with them? And so that's an idea I've put forward, perhaps for something that could be trialled at some time in the future, and some results that come from that. So I suppose they're the two main areas for me. A lot of the findings were extensively supported by the literature. So a lot hasn't changed, and for a lot of people, for me, there were some similarities between our experience in our family and what some of these parents experienced. But there was also this, to me, where emotional expression was encouraged, there seemed to be closer ties. That was a thing that came out from a very small number of participants. We're talking about 8 participants in total. So there are limitations, as there are in all studies. Yeah.
There are limitations, but your goal was not to get a statistical numerical outcome, but rather to be able to have the in-depth, very vivid and rich descriptions of your participants, and you certainly achieved that.
Yeah, well, I think so, yes. So I know I'll be teaching about it this morning. To have something that's a believable piece of work, it's important. And we do need to go through the process around the methods of doing things and being transparent to how we do things, and engaging in your own journaling and being open about your own experience of the phenomenon. I think it's important. And I'm very strong on that now. I'm interested in why did people choose this topic, and how has that influenced? Because we do influence our research in many ways. The topic we choose, the research questions we try to answer, the way we recruit participants, the way we conduct interviews or other data collection methods, the way we analyse, the way we report. We all bring ourselves into it, and that's I suppose that's the biggest learning for me that I can now carry on to other students, so that they're aware of that.
So what can I say? I mean, it was certainly a privilege to be able to share in a bit of that journey with you, as it is a privilege to be able to interview you this morning for this new project of ours. So I just want to thank you so much, George, and congratulate you on a fantastic effort and a fantastic result. And maybe a little bit of nagging's not going to go astray.
Well, Cathy, I want to thank you too, because I know, as you mentioned earlier, I did go through some upheaval with the supervision of my project, and you came on board, and we've only met each other over a computer screen. And I remember early on, I looked up your CV, and I was a bit like threatened. I thought, oh no. And you've certainly put me through the ringer at times, but it's what I feel is at the end, I've got a product that may not have been as good if you hadn't been involved. And so you know, I'm pleased you came on board, but I'm also pleased I don't have to send anything for feedback anymore.
I'm going to learn about that. Okay, I'll end the recording now, but once again, thank you so very much for doing this. I've got to find this.